a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
So this is the year of the pitcher, or at least the second year of the pitcher since 1968 was the year of the pitcher.
I mean, it feels a little disingenuous. The year of the pitcher, is there going to be an asterisk next to that?
Right. So the year of the slick pitcher or the sticky pitcher, or no more, actually, given that since they took the sticky stuff sort of out of the game and started legislating against it checking people on the mound, the spin rates have gone down and the hitting has gotten a little better.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Like, I mean, you see an immediate improvement pretty much across the league. Numbers jumping up, guys hitting the ball just farther. You're seeing more home runs, more better average. I think I'd really love to check specifically the percentage of outs gotten on sliders right before and after this change, because I felt like that was the pitch that had kind of started to dominate Major League Baseball.
And it's not just a slider now; it's a back foot slider. Mm-hmm. All right, so there's a whole kind of slider that makes it even more difficult for the hitter.
Because you just throw that really hard down and into a lefty, down and away to a righty slider that looks just like a fastball until it's not.
We're going to talk about relief pitchers and starting pitchers. And so there have been more than a handful, maybe a couple of dozen, what I would say are notable pitchers that both started and relieved, which is kind of unusual other than that.
Because when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Just from the perspective of, think about your average closer. This is a guy that's going to have exceptional stuff, but either is somebody that can't sustain it or doesn't have the control to be a multi-inning pitcher.
Or the arsenal. Right?
Or the arsenal. Sounds like a great place for a failed starting pitcher.
Right. And that's, you have guys that come up and they can throw 98 miles an hour, but they really don't have a good secondary pitch. Maybe, or if they have it, it's just one.
I don't think it would be much. I think it would be much more unusual to have a guy that was, because I think we've only seen it going established starter to closer. Are there any examples of a guy going that was an established closer and then becoming a starter? Wainwright?
Later in his career. Wainwright? No, I wouldn't say he didn't do enough.
He didn't do it enough. He closed for a really tiny period of his career, and that was briefly.
Right. A guy that I know. Well, let's kind of talk about them, because it's a more of a thing that happened. I think the first guy I was aware of, and well before your time and before my time even, is a guy named Hoyt Wilhelm, who pitched back in the 1950s through the early 1970s. Yeah. Well, he is a Hall of Famer.
Really?
Okay. Yes, he's a Hall of Famer. And for a second, because I'm using B-WAR stats, Baseball Reference WAR, and not Fangraph stats for WAR. And most people that look at baseball stats say that it's better to rate pitchers Fangraph WAR versus Baseball Reference WAR, and hitters should be on the Baseball Reference site. But we're going to use Baseball Reference for right now. And his career WAR is 46.8, which is high for a pitcher. Remember, pitchers only pitch a few times a week.
Right.
You're not going to get 180
You don't get
WAR.
as many chances to accumulate WAR.
So that you're not going to be able to start. And he started 52 games in his career. So that, is a fair amount of starts, right? If you think about 30 starts, 35 starts in a season.
It's more than a full season's worth of starts.
Right. I think that's notable. That's a good barometer. He pitched in 1,070 games.
So he was used way more as a reliever.
Right. And he had 228 saves, but remember, the save wasn't an official statistic.
Right. So
till
getting 220 saves back then probably means he had a few more just because of when they started tracking it, and they didn't use them like they do now.
Well, and like I said, the save came in 69. So let's see, he starts in 52. So he's 17 years into his career, and all of a sudden in 69, Hoyt Wilhelm, he's got 194 saves, and we just started counting now.
Yeah, he probably lost quite a few.
No, I think they
retroactively awarded him.
That's how they accumulated 229 saves. So he was one of the first guys that I remember being, thought of as a notable relief pitcher, but was a starter. And a knuckleballer named Wilbur Wood was the other guy, and he pitched about 10 years after that, from 61 to 78, had a career WAR of 50. This is interesting. 50. He started 297 games, and he went 164 and 156, had 57 saves. So he had a very nice career. He was notable for being a knuckleballer. Mm-hmm. Okay. He was notable for winning both games of a doubleheader as a relief pitcher, and later starting both games of a no-hitter.
So, okay, winning both
Not a no-hitter, of a doubleheader.
winning both games as a reliever, as a knuckleballer, okay, I
Right.
can see that happening. Starting both games of a doubleheader
Right.
is wild.
I don't know if anybody else that I can think of has ever done that. And Wilbur Wood, we talked about WAR. His career WAR is 50. He's not in the Hall of Fame.
No.
Roy Wilhelm is 46.8. He is in the Hall of Fame.
Well, 500 record, that's not the best record for a career, and 57 saves is not going to get you there with a great WAR. Like, he was an effective player, but he didn't get stats in an era where stats mattered.
Fair point. And Hoyt Wilhelm, I think the 1,000 games, pitching in 1,000 games is like, okay, if you're going to pitch in 1,000 games, you're probably going to the Hall of Fame.
You probably did it pretty good.
Somebody put you out there 1,000 times. But the standard bearer, right? If you had to say who are the greatest pitchers that accomplished notable feats in both starting and relieving.
Yeah, both starting and relieving. I mean, there's a pretty short list of guys.
I think there's only two.
There's two that come to mind immediately: Eckersley, Smoltz.
Right. And to me, far
outstrip anybody else because they were elite at both for a significant period of time at both.
So both those gentlemen are involved in baseball today on the analyst side, color side. Eckersley with the Red Sox and Smoltz as a national. We really want to get these guys on the podcast. It would be so great to have them both. Now, I don't know how well they know each other, if they've ever met each other, but let's just take a little look at Eckersley and Smoltz's career. So Eckersley came first, and he came up with the
Athletics.
I think he came up with the Red Sox. Career record of 197 and 171. So that's a lot of decisions.
Yeah. That means you pitched a lot.
390 saves.
Which is because that's a career, with what that record was as a starter. He had a career as a starter before he ever got going as a reliever.
Absolutely. And Eckersley, if you take the combined saves and wins, right, if that were to mean anything, right? So is that a way to measure somebody? So the number one all-time combined saves and wins is a certain guy named Mariano Rivera. Mariano Rivera had 652 saves, but he did have 82 wins.
And that's what a lot of people would not realize, that he almost. Now, granted, those 82 wins were not only as a starter.
Oh, no. He only pitched 10 games as a starter.
Exactly. So he picked up a lot of those wins in relief.
Playing for good Yankee teams that would come back if he came in when the game was tied.
So I feel like it's a little different there because, Eckersley was getting a bunch of those wins as a starting pitcher.
Right. So if Mariano is number one, Trevor Hoffman with the 601 saves and 61 wins is number two for a total of 662 compared to Rivera's 734. Eckersley, though, is third. And what's really cool about his record is 390 saves, 197 wins, 587 total. So he had the closest between the two.
He was the closest to those two. But I mean, I think interestingly, the thing that speaks to me about this record is the innings pitched.
Right.
Because when you look at Rivera and Hoffman, they were both floating in like 1,000 to 1,200 range. Eckersley threw 3,200.
So as just an effective starting pitcher. Now, the fourth guy on the list is kind of interesting because he's not in the Hall of Fame. Although a lot of people
I think a lot of people would argue he's one of those guys that he shouldn't be in all. He is a Hall of Fame.
I would say he is, and he pitched at a different time. So Rich Gossage, came up with the White Sox and started a few games, and I think they finally figured out after a couple of years that this guy's not a starting pitcher, which is what happens.
Because when you're looking at those relievers, you want a guy that's going to be able to come in. And I look at a guy like Edwin Diaz, who, when you look at Edwin Diaz, plus fastball, plus slider, has another pitch. I mean, he has like a changeup he throws occasionally. It's not great. But that's the thing about him right there, is that, he can throw the fastball and the slider is really good, but he can't always throw the slider for a strike. So if you make him a starter, hitters can just go, I won't swing at the slider.
I'll just wait him out.
And maybe he can get through an inning or two that way, but he'll eventually start losing command and he can't keep it up. Whereas as a closer, you don't have time because any slider he does get over is just devastating in a single inning.
So Gossage was just an interesting guy because it was earlier than Eckersley, so he pitched in the early 70s and until through the 80s. And he had 310 saves and 124 wins. And a lot of his efforts were multi-innings because, to your point, with the innings, he had 1,800 innings in his career. So kind of between.
So he was getting used in much longer.
He would pitch 3 innings at a time.
He was
and
not a
4
guy
innings.
that came out for 1 inning.
They didn't do
that.
That position hadn't yet. The closer hadn't been just that position where you only pitched 1 inning most of the time. And it reminded me. Prior to this, we talked about I believe he's still the all-time leader in saves for a left-hander, and that's John Franco, who pitched for the Reds and then the Mets. And when he came to the Mets, the remarkable thing about Franco was that he came up as a hard thrower and a fastball pitcher, but his changeup was his out pitch. And it always bothered me as a fan to have a closer who didn't have his out pitch as a fastball.
But there was a lot of successful closers that didn't.
The number 2 guy here, right, Trevor Hoffman, we talk about.
His changeup was his out pitch.
His out pitch.
Gagne, his changeup was his out pitch. You know, you have some closers, they just have that changeup makes them effective for a longer period of time.
Right. And you talk about, WAR with Gossage, similar WAR in those numbers with Wilhelm and Wilbur Wood, Wilhelm being in the Hall of Fame and Wood not. So, but there have been, the other guy we talked about was Smoltz, and again, another clear Hall of Famer. And again, 213 wins, 155 losses. When it meant something, right? Winning 20 games was pretty important still when Smoltz was pitching. 154 saves. And as I recall, he got into being a relief pitcher because of an injury, and they were trying to save his arm, and he was so good at it that they let him do that for enough to get 154. It was like 3 years or 3 or 4 years.
The thing with Smoltz is it wasn't so much the longevity of his closer, is that he was absolutely elite at it as soon as he started doing it.
And then he went back to closing. I mean, back to starting. So that was really wild, right? You talk about a guy, because as I think you were trying to say, did anybody ever go from being a relief pitcher to being an effective starter? And the answer is not that I can think of. Smoltz comes as close as
as close as anybody has.
Yeah. So, those guys, 8-time All-Star Smoltz, 3,000
Won
strikeouts.
a Cy Young.
Yeah. And he tells his no-hitter story, because we also looked at the list of these guys. Only one guy on our list we're going to talk about has thrown a no-hitter, and Smoltz came close, and then he was hungry after the 8th inning of the no-hitter he was pitching, and he ate a Zagnut bar, and he gave up a hit to Lenny Dykstra and lost his no-hitter. He blames to this day the Zagnut bar.
How dare that?
Have you ever had a Zagnut bar? I don't think I have.
No, I've not.
So other names on the list, guys that were effective. 95 starts for Jose Mesa. You remember Jose Mesa?
I remember Jose Mesa. I don't remember him as a starting pitcher.
Right, because that was early in his career. And then they kind of, with the Indians most notably, right?
He was a Diamondbacks 2 guy, I think, at one point.
Right. His career record was 80 and 109. So this is clearly not a Hall of Fame guy. We're not trying to, but he did have 321 saves.
He was a good closer who did start at one point during his career.
And we've talked before in this podcast about saves and home runs in terms of the aggregate are not that far off. 300 saves doesn't make you a Hall of Famer.
No, because
400 saves makes it a lot closer.
Just because you can kind of accumulate saves.
But if you've got 500 saves,
you didn't do it by accident.
You're going to be in the Hall of Fame. And if you got 500 home runs, unless your name is Manny Ramirez or some of the other notables of the steroid era, you're not going to be in the Hall of Fame. So Mesa, I would have career whip for Mesa at 147. I just can't believe he lasted long enough to get 321 saves, because there's nothing remarkable about his pitching.
There's never a game Jose Mesa went into that you were like, I feel secure now.
So he played from 87 to 2007. The next guy I've got is Derek Lowe.
And I remember he's unusual because he is probably one of the few guys I can imagine that had a 20-win and a 20-save season.
Did he really?
Yeah, because he definitely had a 20-win season.
The only guy that he might have. I know that most recently Ian Kennedy, who you wouldn't think of either, did that, which is remarkable.
Lowe had like 40-something saves in I think 2000, and then he finished third one year when he went 21-8, but he finished behind Pedro and Zito.
And Lowe, a guy who had a better career, I think, than I even gave him credit for.
He was a guy that got derailed by injury. Because he was a dominant pitcher there for a couple of years.
And he adjusted to the changes in his body and from his injuries.
He just couldn't throw the ball at a certain point anymore.
Another Yankee on the list, and this is the guy who did pitch a no-hitter on July 4th, 1983, and started 89 games in his career through a no-hitter, but he had 252 saves. Dave Righetti. Spaghetti or Getty, they joked about calling him back in the day, and I think he's been a pitching coach or was a pitching coach in the majors for a long time, and just a really fine left-handed pitcher who also had a very good career and was good at both. I think that's the interesting thing about Righetti. He didn't get moved to the bullpen because he was just a terrible starter. The guy pitched a no-hitter,
right? Which is kind of like the next guy I was going to talk about, which is Isringhausen.
Yeah.
Jason Isringhausen was part of that Generation K where it was him, Pete Wilson, and who was the third guy?
Bill Pulsifer.
Oh, yeah. That's not good when you're the forgotten.
It wasn't Pete Wilson. It was Pulsifer, Izzy, and Izzy, Pulse, and I'm going to think of the other guy.
I thought it was Wilson.
No, it is. You're right. It was Wilson.
And Isringhausen didn't have it as a starting pitcher. Just was never great.
No, it was clearly not a good.
Gets shipped off to the Cardinals.
Yeah, the Mets kind of sold him for a bag of balls.
Turns into a dominant closer.
Yep. Was a great closer for a long end.
For the Cardinals and the Athletics, if I remember.
Yes. And 300 career saves. So there's that. But a career WAR of 13. Isringhausen just turned from having what would have been a lousy career into having a nice baseball career.
Notable one. Yes.
And another Met on the list. Rick Aguilera. So back for the '86 Mets, Aguilera was sort of a part-time starting pitcher. He didn't pitch all the time. And the Mets, everybody knew he had good stuff, and he was effective for the Mets. And then they let him go. Because they needed something else that he wasn't providing them. And he ended up going to Minnesota, and most notably, and he saved 318 career games. But he did start 89 games in his career.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is where kind of the next one that we had kind of discovered in our research, I feel like, is a little iffy with Wakefield. Because Wakefield was a starting pitcher.
Right. Well, the thing about Wakefield was when they needed him to be a closer that 1 year. They brought him in for half a season. He comes in and he gets 15 saves as a knuckleballer. So as a closer, as a knuckleballer, I think, number one, I was really surprised at how few guys he walked.
That's the more to me, if you think about it, a knuckleballer actually kind of makes sense for a closer because they have the same problem in any one of their starts.
They don't know where it's going.
Either he's going to throw the knuckleball and it's going to be good and sharp, or it's not going to be. It doesn't matter if it's in the first inning or the ninth inning. You know what I mean?
Well, I just think
he's either going to have it or he won't.
It's such an unpredictable pitch to everybody, including the catcher and the hitter and the umpire, for that matter. Isn't it risky to have a guy who can't throw a strike when he needs to?
The thing is, obviously he can throw a strike when he needs to, otherwise he wouldn't be in the major. So it's not so uncontrollable that Wakefield has no idea where it's going.
And all these guys, when it comes to, and we'll do something on knuckleballs one day. I think we should have a whole, see if we can get like RA to come on the show.
Just to talk about it, because it is one of the more weird, unique parts of baseball.
But you go to the knuckleball as a major league pitcher most of the time because everything else you had didn't work.
No, Jacob deGrom's never going to wake up and be like, I think I'm going to
go to the knuckleball.
Better add a knuckleball to my repertoire.
Right. So, and Wakefield, started 463 games. So he was, for all intents and purposes, a starting pitcher. So I just thought it was notable that when they needed him to close, he came in and did, because they had nobody else.
Right.
So, and we mentioned Rivera. And the other guy that I got on here, I got two more guys. One is a guy that you probably have never heard of. Good major league pitcher. I did not know, believe it or not, because he pitched from 1966 to 1984. Ron Reed, okay. Career WAR of 24.9, which is pretty good. He started 236 games. He had a 500 record as a starting pitcher. And he had 103 saves.
Right. Never heard of the guy. 100 saves means you probably were a closer for
a few years.
Because
you weren't getting 40 saves at that time.
3 to 5 years, probably.
Right. And his career whip was 1.21, which that's pretty good in my book.
Pretty good, especially for a guy that started a lot.
Yeah. So
you're going to have to, because it's like as a starter, you're always going to be expected to have a much higher whip than a closer.
And when you get to turn guys into relief pitchers, it's because they like the stuff that the pitchers got, and they feel, okay, you can help us, but you should go and become a relief pitcher.
Which is why, just to bring it up, just because we always end up talking about them with the Mets, which is why I find Lugo really interesting as a reliever, because he doesn't have the trademark things that would indicate he would be a dominant reliever. He wasn't a guy that was throwing fireballs and had all kinds of control issues.
He has a plus fastball. He can throw 97.
It doesn't feel like, because it doesn't look like he's trying.
But it's the spin rate on his curveball that differentiates him.
It's just interesting because you would look at his peripherals and think, why can't this guy start? but
He thinks he can.
he thinks he can. But he's a dominant reliever when
Infinitely more valuable to his team, and particularly in this day and age, right? Because I think we in the sense we've talked about wins not being as important. So why do you want to be a starter? Is it going to be gross innings pitched that okay, I get paid because I throw more innings, and that makes me more valuable to my team, whether they're starting innings or relief innings?
It doesn't matter. Your innings, right? You throw more innings, you're a better pitcher, you're a bigger name, you get more money. The best closer in the league never going to get as paid as much as the best starter in the league.
That's still going to be true, even if a starter only could pitch 6 innings, as it appears to be the case today.
6 is more valuable than 1.
Right. And I think that
even if that one is a high leverage inning,
right, and so starting a game, early in your career, you could see how a guy could all of a sudden maybe lose a little bit off of his fastball, as they say, or whatever it would be, but still has enough stuff to be able to go to the bullpen, but doesn't mean he's going to be a relief pitcher.
right? Because especially if you're going because you lost the stuff to be an effective starter, shortening the time frame in your game
Not going to make it better necessarily.
You're not going to suddenly start being able to throw 96 because guys aren't doing is leaving some in the tank. So now because they only have to pitch 1 inning, they can go all out. They're going all out every inning now.
And you can see by the fact that if you don't have those secondary pitches, a guy like you mentioned, Edwin Diaz, right? You can't pitch 2 days in a row almost, or 3 days in a row.
It's like with Familia.
Can't do it.
When those guys don't have their secondary stuff, the fact that they throw 99 doesn't matter. They still get hit.
So we watched a doubleheader yesterday in the Yankees and the Mets Subway Series. And in the game 2 of the doubleheader, the Mets were trying to come back from an early deficit, and the Yankees brought in Chad Green, who's not a closer.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but I think everybody would say this is a very good major league pitcher. Chad Green
pitched a great inning.
He ended the game.
Just shut him down.
He had 6 or 7 strikeouts. Pitched 3 1/3 innings, and it was like lights off, game over.
And that's what you need.
So how do you value a guy, right, like Chad Green, who has probably spot started a couple of times, virtually doesn't close, but he's an effective pitcher.
Now he's valued a lot more than he would have been 20 years ago.
That's what I'm getting to.
The idea of the setup man has been expanded to you just need great relief pitchers.
Right, and you need a lot of them. So when you pitch a guy like that 3+ innings, I think I heard them saying that he might not pitch again. Let's roll him out there and let him throw more because he can sustain it. Not a lot of relief pitchers can go 3 innings these days, and then he's done until Thursday.
Right, but it's worth it in that one game.
We won the game. We needed to win the game,
and we won the game. That's what's important.
So the closers, when they're not going well, as Chapman happened to Chapman,
they're even kind of more.
Because now you can't use him in game 2.
And they're taking up a roster spot.
Exactly. So I think you're going to start to see evaluation of pitchers get away from only looking at the closer. And we're seeing closers by committee.
Yeah.
We're seeing
You're not going to see guys getting designated as It's going to be starter or reliever, not starting pitcher, reliever, closer.
Right, because we've already seen, over the past, 5 years, I think kind of since Josh Hader has been around, where coming in the 7th inning and getting important outs where you normally would save him for the 9th inning.
Right now, teams are just like, I'd rather get through the important part of the game.
I'm trying to get Acuna and Albies, and Freddie Freeman
with first
in the 7th inning. This is the time to bring in
Josh Hader.
Right, exactly. So I don't think we're going to have these kinds of situations where you're going to have 300 save guys that formerly were starting pitchers.
No, you're going to judge guys off of advanced stats.
Right.
WHIP, K per 9, ERA plus, stuff like that.
And just simply a question of innings, right? So if you go back to Wilhelm's time even, guys just threw a lot of innings. That's just what you did. You had guys throwing 300 innings in a season.
I can't punish.
Never going to happen.
Yeah, I can't punish a guy because he plays in an era where you don't do that.
No, but there was something to be valued.
You can value it back then,
right.
I can't hold it against the guys from today.
Right, and you can't put them in this era and say, well, that would never work today and all that. They did what they had to do at the time.
I just don't think they would work today because they probably didn't have the stuff to work today.
No, they would not. They would not hold the
number of
down.
guys that would have the stuff to be able to compete today would be
that's
limited.
a great point. So there aren't too many more relief pitchers. I think Elroy Face, also in the 50s, had an 18-1 season out of the bullpen, which is just wild
really good,
to me.
But I think only your starters from that era could compete today. Your Bob Gibsons, your Drysdales, your Koufax, they could come and compete today. But the guys you had in the bullpen from back then, no, they get shelled.
No, absolutely
eaten.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.